Hi, I'm Scott, and in this video, I'm going to introduce the concept of plans and give some examples on our current topic. Before I introduce the concept of plans and then subsequently in the next video counterplans, I want to talk a little bit about the background and history to just topics and debate in general, because I think it will really help us understand how planned debate works. So when you debate about a resolution or what we commonly call a topic. They're synonyms, they mean the same thing. When you debate a debate topic, traditionally you debate a topic that is either a claim of fact, a claim of value, or a claim of policy. For the video at hand, we are going to focus on claims of policy because that's what the living wage topic is, but this really depends on your topic. When you have a topic, though, there are two teams, the affirmative and the negative. The affirmative team is in charge of defending the topic. The negative team is in charge of opposing the topic. I know this seems pretty basic, but this is really important because when the affirmative team defends the topic, they are going to defend a change or departure from the status quo. So for instance, on our current living wage topic, the United States does not have a living wage now. So the affirmative team defends changing what we normally call in debate the status quo, or the world the way it is right now. So we say that the affirmative team traditionally is the team of change because they are the ones who are changing the world. The affirmative team defends something that does not exist now. If you think about it, it wouldn't make sense to debate about something that's already happened. So on a lot of the policy-based Lincoln Douglas topics we have, like this topic right now, we don't have a living wage now. So the affirmative defends a change to a living wage. We currently have troops in the West Asia, North Africa region. The affirmative decreases those troops. There's no right to housing in the U.S. right now. The affirmative defends a change from the status quo that gives people the right to housing. So the first thing that I want to start with is that the affirmative is the team of change that says we should change the status quo. Now, in the history of debate, the negative has opposed that change. So that started in sort of the yesteryears of debate with the negative just saying no. The negative then is the team of the actual status quo. They don't say you should change the status quo. They say you should keep the status quo. You should keep the way the world it is now. Don't do a living wage. Let's just keep the world the way it is now. This is a basic introduction to sort of how the roles of the affirmative and negative work, and I think this will be really helpful as we look at planned debate and counterplanned debate more, because that interaction of how the affirmative and negative change the status quo is really important in terms of how planned debate developed and in terms of how counterplanned debate developed, because counterplans, as a little bit of a preview, are going to have the negative change the status quo and not just say the status quo is good. So in a debate where you have a counterplan, the affirmative and the negative change the status quo, instead of the affirmative changing the status quo and the negative saying, no, we're going to keep the world the way it is now. So a brief introduction to this is that typically in traditional Lincoln Douglas debate, the affirmative team defends the topic, defends the change, defends that whole statement as being true, and the negative says, no, let's keep the world the way it is right now. Hopefully you understand that. I'm going to give you a couple examples, if you didn't, that will hopefully drive this home a little better. So let's start with a not so serious example that I think will really help us drive this home. So let's start with the resolution, my mom should buy me a car. So if we have that statement as our resolution in sort of traditional Lincoln Douglas debate, the affirmative team would defend that entire statement and say that is true, as long as it upheld certain stock issues when you look at sort of a policy background to what the affirmatives is supposed to do. One of those things was that the affirmative has to meet the whole resolution. So as long as the affirmative defended this entire statement, that became true. Now, when policy style debate started to become more prevalent in Lincoln Douglas debate, you saw what we call sort of planned style debate. So planned style debate is when the affirmative team is going to argue for a specific instance of a resolution to be true as their affirmative, as long as it falls 100% underneath of the resolution. So for instance, if this was the topic, rather than me defending this whole statement, which you might do in a more traditional rules circuit, an affirmative team might read a plan that says, my mom should buy me a Toyota. Or you could even specify what type of car, a Corolla, right? There might be reasons why it's strategic for you to do this, which I'm going to talk about in the latter half of this video, which is kind of, well, sure, you can read plans, that's a great idea, but why would you? And I'm going to get more into why it's strategic to do that. But the general concept of this is that if, let's say, the negative team were to come up here and say, Scott is an unsafe driver, maybe my mom buying me a Toyota Corolla would be beneficial to me because if I get into an accident, that car is going to protect me better than just any generic car. So reading a plan is going to be good for me in that instance so that I can sort of avoid what the negative says with their safety contention. The other reason that an affirmative might do this is, let's say the negative was prepared to say Volkswagen is bad, then the affirmative would not have to defend against any of those arguments because they defend a Toyota instead of a Volkswagen. So therefore, there's some strategic benefits to why you would do this, but this is a generic example for this. Now, because a Toyota Corolla is a car, it falls underneath of that topic. If, for instance, this statement said a Toyota Tacoma, which is a truck, maybe we could say a truck isn't a car, so therefore this plan is not topical because it does not meet the burden of being a car. Remember, we said one of the things in traditional debate you had to have was these things called stock issues, and one of those things is topicality, that the affirmative must fall underneath of the resolution. So, you could have a plan that would work that would buy me a Ferrari, for instance. That would still be a car. That would be an affirmative that would be topical in this debate and could be an affirmative that you could read as a planned affirmative. However, if you got up here and said that my dad should buy me the Ferrari, then that probably would not fall underneath of the topic because the topic says my mom, and since my mom is not my dad, therefore that plan would not fall underneath of the resolution. So the idea of plans is that the affirmative can defend a specific instance of the resolution as long as it proves the entire resolution true and falls underneath 100% of the resolution. I know that this is kind of a not serious debate example, but I think that this is really helpful in terms of understanding how plans work before I talk about some more serious examples on our living wage topic, which I'm going to do right now. So on our topic, the United States ought to require that workers receive a living wage. There are a bunch of different planned affirmatives that have come up already that I want to talk about that will give you a better understanding of what plans are, how planned affirmatives work, and sort of some examples on our topic. So the biggest way that people have been reading planned affirmatives on our current topic is by reading subset affirmatives that defend a specific type of worker. So, for instance, I have seen affirmatives that talk about different healthcare workers. I have seen affirmatives talk about farmers. I've seen affirmatives that have talked about teachers. I've seen affirmatives that have talked about members of the military or federal employees. All of these affirmatives, rather than say all workers, which is what a traditional style LD affirmative would do, specify that only workers in this specific industry should receive a living wage. So, for instance, with the healthcare affirmative, everybody who works in the healthcare industry would receive a living wage. Or the teacher's affirmative, every teacher who teaches in a public school or whatever the affirmative says would receive a living wage. These affirmatives are strategic, which I'm going to talk about next, because they only defend a specific part of the resolution. Now, while these are different subsets of workers, normally different topics that we have, there are many different ways to read planned affirmatives. So one of the things that I want you to think about is it's not just, okay, you can specify your worker, but it's also that some teams might even specify what a living wage is. So I think that an affirmative that says that we should have a $15 federal minimum wage, maybe that's a planned affirmative underneath a living wage. If the affirmative team has evidence that says a $15 federal minimum wage is a living wage, then that affirmative would be a planned affirmative that would be topical because it specifies specifically what that living wage is. So I think while these style of subset affirmatives are more prevalent now, that when you look at a different topic, just like how when I gave you the not so serious example, the actor changed from my mom to my dad, or the car type changed, that when you have this style of plan-based debate, any part of the resolution can be chosen as a place where the affirmative team can get sort of tricky with reading their more specific plan in the debate. So hopefully this is a good understanding or a good introduction to plans and some examples on our current living wage topic. Now I want to talk about why you would even read plans to begin with. So why would you even read a plan to begin with? The core reason you would read a plan is because they are strategic. The real reason, and we're going to get to this with counter plans too, the reason why these type of progressive arguments or arguments from policy debate or, not traditional style arguments get implemented is because they are strategic to read in a debate. So if we look at plans specifically, the key reason they're strategic is because they sort of counteract what the negative strategy is in the debate. So if we look at the example of my mom should buy me a car, if the negative's main example or disad is going to be Scott's going to get into a car accident, if I have a planned affirmative that has me buy a Volvo instead and says Volvos are really safe, I'm going to be able to no link or at least substantially mitigate the link to the negative's disadvantage about me getting into a car accident. So the reason that a plan would be strategic is because you can do things like no link disadvantages or make case arguments not apply or get out of other sort of arguments. If you think about other negative strategies that you could counteract, a lot of affirmatives are written to just beat core negative generic strategies. So on our living wage topic, one of the key counter plans, if I was writing an affirmative that I would want to beat, is the state's counter plan. So if we look at affirmatives like the federal workers affirmative or the military affirmative, those affirmatives are particularly strategic because the states just don't have control of military workers and don't have control of federal workers. That is only something that the federal government has jurisdiction over. So if the negative's main strategy is the state's counter plan, which I think it should be because I think it beats a lot of these progressive affirmatives, then that affirmative is particularly strategic because you can garner benefits that are specific to those workers that the states can't access. The second reason that you would want to sort of read a plan or why it's strategic is not just sort of to counteract the negative, but to gain yourself some type of specific strategic advantage in the debate. Typically, this takes the form of some type of advantage in the debate. So, for instance, if I, buy a Tesla, maybe I can read a contention or an advantage that is all based around electric cars and why electric cars and the future of electric cars and consumers adopting electric cars is really important in order to save the world in the future. If you were going to have a debate about me buying a car, you probably wouldn't be prepared to have a debate about the future of electric cars saving the world. I think that some of the planned affirmatives on this topic that we've talked about, like the farmer's affirmative or the teacher's affirmative, kind of fall underneath this category because most debaters were preparing to have like inflation economy debates and probably weren't ready for these sort of in-depth agriculture debates because they didn't think that they fell underneath of the core substantive area of the topic. I think next month's topic, if it is this incentives for nuclear power topic, I think you'll see this a lot where a lot of teams will read a specific type of nuclear power or a specific type of reactor and then try to say all of your evidence that says nuclear power is bad doesn't apply to us because we are this one specific type of thing. So it's not only to gain the specific advantage of that type of power being good, but it's also to counteract the negative in the debate for doing this. So I think that that is what makes plans in and of themselves a core strategic argument for the affirmative. Now, one of the problems is, and probably going to get into this more in my next video, but this really makes you susceptible to different counter plans that I think, coupled with the right disadvantage, maybe beat these affirmatives better than if you would defend a whole resolution. So for instance, if you had the military affirmative, maybe instead of giving military people a living wage, you could do all sorts of other things for military readiness that would affect recruiting. Maybe you could give health care to military workers. I think that there's all sorts of different things that you could counteract this with. I think a farming aff that you just have some other country farm a bunch and then read the inflation disadvantage would work really well. I think there's a lot of different ways for teachers or for at least the substance area of STEM to be increased without teachers. I think we could look at colleges rather than school teachers. We could look at student-based incentives rather than teachers. I think that while they are strategic and they do counteract the negatives arguments, they do bring about a whole bunch of new negative arguments that might be harder to answer or might be even more strategic for the negative to read in some of these debates. Now, the one thing that I want to be careful with is that a lot of debaters at this moment are like, aha, I can read the most specific thing possible, and that is what is good. The one thing that I want to hesitate you with, or, give you some hesitation, is that the more specific you get, typically your access, your internal link, or your link to your advantages is a lot less, and also that you tend to fall victim to topicality in debates where you try to get really specific instead of being a broader subset of the topic, because it gives the negative more traction to read topicality arguments. I don't really think this is the case on our current topic. I think that there's kind of a core subset of affirmatives, but I think an example of this would be if you would look at an affirmative that would have prison workers given a living wage. I think that the negative could read an argument about how typically prisoners aren't considered workers because they don't have an employment contract and aren't bound by the current minimum wage. Now, I think this is probably what that team wants you to say in the debate, because they're probably going to be prepared to critique the idea why prison labor shouldn't be considered that way and that that's the root of the problem and all sorts of things like that, which is a different style of debate. But I do think that normally topicality is sort of a check on how specific these plans get, as well as sort of just the core literature and the substance being there for you to have that strategic advantage to gain in the first place. So hopefully this was a good little introduction to how plans and planned-based debate work before I talk about counterplans in the next video. I'll see you there.